Victoria quietly slipped through the back door of the concert hall, the completed notes of her composition in hand. Famous conductor Anthony Richards looked at her, a condescending smile forming on his lips. Who does this woman think she is? He thought. None of them knew that this ordinary-looking woman was one of the greatest living geniuses of modern classical music, and that day would mark the end of Anthony's perfect career. The magnificent rehearsal hall of the New York Philharmonic was full of energy, even in the early morning hours. The grand crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, century-old wooden panels adding history and prestige to the walls. Musicians were adjusting their instruments, reviewing their notes, preparing themselves for Anthony Richards' harsh criticisms that could come at any moment. There was a tense anticipation in the air, like the calm before a storm. Richards, 45, was one of the brightest stars in the classical music world. He was known for his Grammy-winning recordings, international tours, and flawless interpretations. London Symphony, Berlin Philharmonic, Vienna Philharmonic, all of them lined up to play under his mesmerizing direction. Music critics described him as the genius of the generation, the Karajan of our time. When Anthony Richards entered the hall, everyone immediately straightened up. With his sharp features, silver temples, and piercing blue eyes, he had an impressive appearance. His navy suit, custom-tailored by Italian craftsmen, platinum watch, and perfect posture showed that he was not just a musician, but a star. Every movement exuded confidence. His authoritative manner and musical genius elicited a shiver of respect and fear from the musicians. "Ladies and gentlemen, may I have your attention?" Anthony said in a stern voice. He tapped his baton lightly on the stand, his manicured nails gleaming under the stage lights. "Today we will be working on the most important piece of the new season. The board of directors expects the premiere to be perfect. And I expect the same from you. We have no room for mediocrity." The musicians straightened up, giving their full attention to their conductor. None of them would forget that Anthony accepted nothing less than his perfectionist standards. Last season, he had made a cellist cry during rehearsal for a single wrong note. At another concert, he had replaced the leader of the second violin section in the middle of the stage for a tempo mistake. For Anthony Richards, nothing less than perfection in music was acceptable. "The piece we'll be working on today is the Ghost Symphony," Anthony continued, shuffling through the notes. "The composer is anonymous, known only by the initials V.A. Zerenia, but the piece is extraordinary. Critics are calling it the masterpiece of the decade. The board of directors thinks this will be a groundbreaking season for the New York Philharmonic." Meanwhile, Victoria Adams, who had entered through the back door of the hall, quietly settled into the back row. At 42, Victoria didn't attract attention with her worn gray sweater, faded jeans, and minimal makeup. The pencil tucked into her messy bun, the tired eyes that showed she hadn't slept for days, and the worn notebook in her hand made her appear to be an ordinary observer. Fine lines had carved character into her face, crow's feet at the corners of her eyes when she smiled, slight shadows showing she had cried many times, and lines that formed on her forehead when she was thinking. But there was a remarkable intelligence and depth in her eyes, if anyone had bothered to look closely. No one could have guessed that this modest-looking woman was the mysterious and respected composer of modern classical music, known by the signature V.A. Victoria had created groundbreaking compositions over the past decade while keeping her identity secret, never appearing in public. Only a few trusted managers and music publishers knew her true identity. Victoria was a woman shaped by life. After studying music at Princeton, she had come to New York as a young composer with a promising career. However, as a cruel twist of fate, after losing her 5-year-old daughter Emma to leukemia, she had completely withdrawn from the public eye. She had channeled her pain and emotions into her compositions, presenting her music to the world under the protection of anonymity. She wanted only her notes to speak, not herself. The Ghost Symphony was her newest and perhaps most personal work. Victoria had composed this piece in memory of her lost little daughter. The 4-movement symphony was a musical narration of loss, grief, acceptance, and finally finding peace. Now she had come to see how Anthony Richards would interpret this piece. "Let's start with the first movement," Anthony said, raising his baton. "Tempo allegro con fuoco," with emotion but without losing control. This is not a lament, it's a challenge. Victoria frowned slightly. She had actually composed the first movement as a musical depiction of the moment her daughter was diagnosed, reflecting the emotions of shock, denial, and initial helplessness. Anthony's interpretation of challenge completely missed the spirit of the piece. The rehearsal began. The first few measures were played perfectly under Anthony's stern direction. The orchestra was technically perfect, every note in its right place, every chord balanced, but Victoria couldn't hear the emotional resonance coming from deep within. The music was being played perfectly, but it lacked soul. Toward the end of the first movement, Anthony raised his hand. Stop! Stop! Strings, this passage is being played too technically. I want more passion, but controlled passion. Look, like this. He hummed the melody to himself, drawing shapes in the air with his hands. Victoria scribbled something in her notes. Anthony's interpretation was technically correct, but it missed the emotional essence of the piece. How could she express this? When they moved to the second movement, Anthony's tempo was much faster than Victoria had written. This movement depicted her daughter's battle with illness, the fluctuation of bright moments and dark days. Anthony was conducting it like a war march, strong, determined, almost aggressive. Victoria's hand trembled as she took more notes. They were making the piece unrecognizable. By the time they reached the third movement, there was now open concern on Victoria's face. Anthony was completely misinterpreting the emotional heart of the piece. No, 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 Anthony shouted, bringing down his baton. The musicians suddenly stopped, some of them slightly flinching. This passage should be much faster and more aggressive. Fortissimo, do you understand? Fortissimo. The composer is depicting a storm here, not a lullaby. Victoria bit her lip. In reality, this passage was entirely written as a lullaby. The lullaby she sang to her lost daughter every night. During Emma's final days, Victoria would sit by her bed and hum this melody. Anthony Richards had completely misunderstood. After listening for a few more minutes, Victoria could no longer bear it. The essence of the piece was being completely lost. She slowly stood up, trying to stop her hands from trembling. She could hear her heart beat. Actually, she said in a soft but determined voice, this passage should be played more softly and gently. It's not a storm. It's a farewell. The hall suddenly fell silent. All the musicians and Anthony Richards turned to the back in surprise. For a few seconds, as Victoria stood in the back rows, time seemed to stand still. Anthony's face showed first surprise, then anger. His eyes narrowed, his jaw tensed. Excuse me, he said, his voice dangerously low. Who are you, and how dare you interrupt my rehearsal? Victoria took a step forward, trying to straighten her shoulders. I'm just a listener, but music is a universal language, and this passage has been misunderstood. Anthony laughed, turning mockingly to his musicians. Look, friends, today is our lucky day. We have an expert in the back rows. There were laughs, most stemming from discomfort. Perhaps you would like to take my baton and conduct the orchestra. Ms. Adams, Victoria Adams, the woman said calmly. And no, I'm just here as an observer. Well, Ms. Adams, Anthony said, pronouncing the words like poison. What exactly is your musical education that allows you to question my interpretation? How many concerts have you conducted at Carnegie Hall? How many Grammy Awards do you have? At which conservatory are you a professor, or are you a piano teacher at a local music school? The hall was engulfed in tense silence. The musicians shifted uncomfortably. Some looked at Victoria with sympathy, others with curiosity. Victoria's cheeks flushed slightly, but her gaze remained determined. These eyes fearlessly met Anthony's own gaze. I've never conducted a concert, she said honestly, but I understand music, especially this piece. Anthony suppressed a laugh. You understand music? Wonderful. I've been wasting my 30-year career. Ms. Adams understands music. He turned to the orchestra members. Did you hear that? Maybe we should all quit our jobs and take lessons from Miss Adams. A few musicians laughed uncomfortably, most looking at the floor. The concertmaster, an elderly violinist, looked at Victoria apologetically. Victoria stood in place with a calm but hurt expression. I just wanted to preserve the spirit of the piece, she said quietly. This piece holds a special meaning. The spirit of the piece? Anthony was now completely sarcastic. And how do you know the spirit of this piece? Did you ask the composer? Or did you communicate with your mystical powers? Perhaps VA came to you in a dream last night and whispered the true interpretation. Is that it? Victoria blinked, trying to control her emotions. It was unbearable to have this man mock her work, her pain, the memory of her daughter in this way. But at the same time, it wasn't the right time to reveal her identity. After all, she had chosen to remain anonymous. Ms. Adams, let me give you some advice, Anthony continued, walking toward the edge of the stage. When music professionals are working, it's best to observe silently. Leave this job to us. This is best for amateurs like you. Amateur. The word hit Victoria's face like a slap. The brightest music student at Princeton, winner of 5 international composition competitions, one of the most respected composers in the classical music world, being called an amateur. Just then, the door to the hall opened, and in walked Robert Jenkins, the director of the New York Philharmonic. He was a friendly man in his 60s, elegantly dressed. Beside him was Sarah Mitchell, one of the most respected producers in the classical music world. Sarah was one of the few people who knew Victoria's secret identity and was the person who introduced her works to the world. "Ah, Robert, Sarah, you've come just in time," said Anthony, with an artificial smile on his face. "Let me tell you about an interesting situation. Here is a lady who has interrupted our rehearsal and questioned my interpretation. She thinks she's an expert in music." Robert and Sarah looked at Victoria, and both their faces showed expressions of shock. Sarah's mouth fell open, her eyes widened. "Victoria," Sarah gasped, "you finally came. We were expecting you. Robert, this is the person I was telling you about." The smile froze on Anthony's face. His eyes went back and forth between Sarah and Victoria. You know each other?" Robert stepped forward, placing his hand on Anthony's shoulder. "Anthony, this is the person I wanted to introduce you to. Victoria Adams, or as the music world knows her, VA, the composer of the Ghost Symphony." A wave of shock spread throughout the hall. Musicians looked at each other in astonishment. Some straightened in their chairs, some held their breath. Anthony's face first turned red, then white as a sheet. He dropped his baton. The sound of it hitting the wooden floor echoed in the silence. This is impossible," he stammered. "VA is an anonymous composer. No one knows them. It's been like this for 10 years. "Now you know," said Sarah, coming to Victoria's side. She protectively wrapped her arm around Victoria's shoulder. "Victoria has been publishing her works under a hidden identity for 10 years. Only a few of us knew the truth. She wanted her music to be evaluated on its own merits, not by her name or appearance." The musicians were now in complete shock. The elderly concertmaster rose from his chair and took a step toward Victoria, his eyes shining with admiration. "Ms. Adams, VA, your works are beyond words to me," he said in a trembling voice. "It is a great honor to play the music you have composed." Victoria smiled slightly, thanking him. Then she took a step toward Anthony. She came face to face with the man who had belittled and humiliated her. Anthony was still in shock, struggling to find words. "Mr. Richards, thank you for your interest in my piece," Victoria said politely, but her voice was cold. "However, you need to understand the story and spirit of the symphony. This is a very personal piece for me. The first movement tells the day my daughter was diagnosed with her illness. The second movement, her struggle. That passage in the third movement, the lullaby I sang at her bedside every night. And the fourth movement, my farewell to her." The atmosphere in the hall changed. Everyone listened to Victoria's words in deep silence. Anthony's face was now covered with an expression of genuine shame. The woman standing before him was not just a random observer, but one of the most respected composers in contemporary classical music, and he had openly humiliated her. I apologize," he said, his voice now having lost its confidence. "My behavior is inexcusable. I'm not used to having anyone question my musical interpretation." Victoria smiled slightly with sparks in her eyes. "What matters is the piece, Mr. Richards, not me. Your musicians are wonderful, but you're missing the heart of the piece. This lullaby is not a show of power. It's a farewell song. If you'll allow me, I can show you." The hall once again fell into silence. Anthony hesitated for a moment, vacillating between his pride and his astonishment. Then he slowly bent down and picked up the baton he had dropped. He looked at it for a moment, then extended it to Victoria. "Please," he said, with genuine humility, "show us. This is your piece. It should be interpreted as you wish." Victoria took the baton, weighing it in her hand for a moment. For the first time in 10 years, she would stand in front of an orchestra. For the first time in 10 years, she would conduct her own music. She walked to the front of the orchestra, to the center of the stage. The musicians looked at her with expressions mixing astonishment and curiosity. Victoria took a deep breath, visualizing her daughter's smile in her mind. "Let's start from the third movement," she said in a soft voice. "From the lullaby section." She raised her baton, paused for a moment, then began to conduct the orchestra with soft, graceful movements. Her hands seemed to weave the music, every movement filled with an expression of emotion. As the first notes began to dance in the air, the hall was enveloped in a magical atmosphere. Under Victoria's hands, the music took on a completely different dimension. The complexity within simplicity, the strength within gentleness, deeply affected everyone in the hall. Anthony Richards watched in astonishment from the edge of the stage. The same notes, the same instruments, the same musicians, but an entirely different piece. In Victoria's hands, the Ghost Symphony had found its true spirit. This woman, behind her modest exterior, spoke the language of music perfectly. When they reached that controversial passage in the third movement, a slight sadness appeared on Victoria's face. As she moved her hand with soft, gentle movements, the hall seemed to rock like a cradle. The lullaby, with all its simplicity and emotional depth, filled the hall. Tears gleamed in the eyes of several musicians. A female cellist was quietly crying, seemingly overwhelmed by the emotional weight of the music. As the rehearsal continued, Victoria led the orchestra to the fourth movement, the farewell and acceptance movement. The music in this section conveyed a sense of hope and peace rising from deep grief. Under Victoria's hands, the orchestra was beating like a collective heart. When the rehearsal ended, the hall was completely silent for a moment. It was as if everyone was holding their breath, watching the last notes of the music hanging in the air. Then suddenly, the orchestra members stood up and began to applaud enthusiastically. Some were wiping tears, some were hugging each other. Victoria bowed her head modestly, tears in her eyes as well. Anthony stepped forward, his face now showing an expression of genuine respect, not arrogance. Tears were also gleaming in his eyes. "Ms. Adams, VA, I truly apologize," he said, his voice trembling with sincerity. "I failed to recognize a genius like you and behaved inexcusably. Today you've given me a great lesson about the true meaning and spirit of music." Victoria smiled. "Music is our common language, Mr. Richards. We are all its servants. Sometimes the deepest emotions are expressed with the simplest notes." Robert Jenkins stepped forward, clapping his hands. "That was magnificent, truly magnificent. Victoria, I know you've kept your identity secret for years, but perhaps it's time to show your true face to the world. I would like to extend an official invitation for you to conduct the symphony with Anthony and the New York Philharmonic." The hall filled with cheers. The musicians showed their approval by tapping their instruments. Victoria hesitated for a moment. She had hidden herself for 10 years, silently mourning her daughter. But perhaps Robert was right. Maybe it was time to open herself and her music to the world. "I'll think about it," Victoria said softly. "But first, let's ensure the piece is played correctly." 6 months after this incident, a big headline appeared on the culture page of the New York Times. "Mysterious composer reveals identity as Victoria Adams. Signs historic collaboration with Anthony Richards." Victoria Adams was no longer hiding her identity. With her modest appearance and simple style, she was creating storms in the classical music world. She was using her platform to raise awareness about judgment based on appearance, working to make classical music more inclusive. Anthony Richards had undergone a major transformation. He now worked with a less authoritarian, more collaborative approach. He showed more respect to musicians and was open to the ideas of especially young composers. His encounter with Victoria had deeply changed him. At the premiere of their first concert together at Carnegie Hall, the hall was completely full. Tickets had sold out within minutes of going on sale. Everyone wanted to see the real face of the mysterious VA, to hear her music from her own hands. The concert was magnificent. Anthony conducted the first three pieces, then invited Victoria to the stage for the Ghost Symphony. When Victoria came on stage, she was wearing a simple black dress, her hair in a simple bun. Her unshowy, modest appearance had not changed even in front of a hall full of people. When the music began, the hall was enchanted. Under Victoria's hands, the orchestra seemed to breathe like a single instrument. When the lullaby in the third movement was played, the hall fell completely silent. As tears flowed from Victoria's eyes, the music kept her daughter's memory alive. When the concert ended, the hall gave a standing ovation. Victoria and Anthony bowed while holding hands, a living example of the unifying power of music. Backstage, Anthony turned to Victoria. "You know, that day you should have been thrown out of the hall. Most conductors would certainly have done so. I was about to do it myself." Victoria smiled. "Perhaps, but sometimes life's most beautiful lessons come from the most unexpected sources." "Besides," she said, with a mischievous glint in her eyes, "maybe going against people's expectations is part of my character. After all, I managed to hide my identity for 10 years. Anthony nodded with a serious expression. "Do you know what the most valuable lesson you taught me was?" he asked. Victoria looked at him curiously. "True genius doesn't need to show itself," Anthony said thoughtfully. "It exists quietly, modestly, until the world discovers it. I've always focused on showing myself, on shining. Maybe that's why I was missing the essence of music." Victoria's eyes sparkled. "And sometimes, Mr. Richards, the deepest music comes from the quietest hearts." She paused for a moment, then added, "That was the most important lesson my daughter taught me." Emma loved music, especially when I played. She was so small that she couldn't evaluate whether it was technically perfect. She could only feel it. And perhaps that's what's most important in music. Anthony absorbed Victoria's words. "Emma, was that your daughter's name?" Victoria nodded, her eyes looking into the distance. "Yes, she succumbed to leukemia at the age of 5. In her last few months, I would sing that lullaby to her every night. Sometimes when I lost her, I thought I had lost my music too. But then I realized that music was a way to keep her alive." "And you chose the initials VA," said Anthony, suddenly understanding. "Victoria and not Adams. Victoria and Emma," Victoria completed. "Adams was my maiden name, but VA represented the bond between my daughter and me. Each of my compositions was like a letter to her." Anthony nodded silently. This woman was not only a musical genius, but also someone with incredible strength and resilience. She had been able to transform the deepest pain into art. That night as they were leaving Carnegie Hall, a young musician stopped Victoria. The young girl, who said she was a conservatory student, was trembling with excitement. "Miss Adams, may I ask you something?" she said, her eyes shining with admiration. "How did you manage to stay so modest? With all your genius, how did you choose to remain anonymous for years? To give up fame, applause, recognition?" Victoria thought for a moment, taking the question seriously. "Because for me, what's important is the music, not the fame," she finally said. "The notes, not the applause. And sometimes the most valuable things are not in plain sight. When I lost my daughter, I learned how transient everything is. Fame, money, success, they can all disappear in an instant. But music, emotion, connection, they endure." The young musician bowed her head gratefully, deeply affected by Victoria's modest wisdom. "I want to be like you," she whispered. Victoria laughed gently. "No, be yourself. That's more valuable. The world already has an Anthony Richards. It already has a Victoria Adams. But your voice is unique. Find it and speak with it." The young girl wiped her tears, thanked Victoria, and walked away. Victoria watched her go, remembering that she too was once so young and idealistic. Anthony came to Victoria's side as they waited for the car. "A new fan?" "A new voice," Victoria corrected. "Young musicians always affect me. They still have that pure passion. They love music just because it's music. Just like you, said Anthony, using the informal you for the first time. I guess that's why you're so good. You never lost that purity. Victoria thanked him, truly touched by this praise. Appreciation from someone like Anthony was very valuable in the music world. I have new ideas for tomorrow's rehearsal, Anthony said, changing the subject. For the fourth movement, I think I understand your vision better now. The transition from despair to hope, the acceptance of loss, but not completely dark. There's a light within it, Victoria nodded. Yes, exactly like that. When I lost my daughter, my world was plunged into darkness. But over time, I realized that her memory was a light. The fourth movement tells this journey, from grief to acceptance, and from there to a kind of peace. Anthony thoughtfully agreed. I'll try it tomorrow, and if I need help, I'll be here, said Victoria with a sincere smile. The next day, the rehearsal was surprisingly different. Following his conversation with Victoria the night before, Anthony was approaching the piece with a completely new understanding. The musicians felt the change too. Anthony's usually sharp instructions were now more thoughtful, more sensitive. Look, this passage reflects a child's innocence, Anthony said, explaining a part of the second movement. Here, emotion is more important than technical perfection, a light touch, as if capturing a memory. Victoria was sitting in the back row, but this time not as a stranger, but as an honored guest. Occasionally, Anthony would look at her, seeking her approval. Victoria would respond with small nods and smiles. A wordless agreement, a bridge of respect had been built between them. 3 weeks later, the premiere of The Ghost Symphony was a great success. New York's music critics praised the piece and its interpretation. One critic wrote, Richards and Adams, with a harmony rarely seen in classical music, have managed to delve into the depths of the piece. Another commented, the revelation of VA's identity could be the beginning of a new era in the classical music world. An era where the sound, not the appearance, is important. Victoria Adams' story became a legend in the classical music world, a powerful reminder about the dangers of judging by appearance, the modest nature of true genius, and the unifying power of music. Anthony Richards also became a symbol of change, a living example of how a moment of arrogance could turn into a moment of humility and open-mindedness. A year after the concert, Victoria and Anthony were working together on a new project, this time a concert series for the benefit of children with leukemia. In this project, which they named Emma's Melodies, they were providing opportunities for young composers and emphasizing the healing power of music. After a rehearsal, Anthony approached Victoria. I was thinking, he said, if you hadn't come to the rehearsal that day, if you hadn't spoken up, how different everything would have been. Maybe I would have completely misinterpreted your piece, and no one would have known the truth. Victoria nodded thoughtfully. Maybe, but I believe that true music eventually finds its own way. Perhaps in a different manner, perhaps at a different time, but it finds it. Because ultimately, music is a bridge between people, beyond our appearances, our titles, sometimes even our words. Anthony smiled. And sometimes it comes from the most unexpected places. Just like you, a woman with a worn sweater and a messy bun, but carrying an ocean of symphonies inside. Victoria laughed. You mean don't judge a book by its cover? Exactly, said Anthony with a serious expression, and perhaps that's the most important lesson for music and life. As the two musicians left the stage, they left behind the silent witness of the notes. Though they had come from different paths, the universal language of music had united them. And perhaps that was the most beautiful melody in this world, the melody that plays in those rare moments when people can truly hear each other beyond prejudices, behind appearances. How did the story of Victoria Adams's incredible talents and the valuable lesson Anthony learned affect you? Have you ever experienced a moment when you were judged by your appearance or misjudged someone? Share your thoughts in the comments. If you want to hear more inspiring stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. Sometimes the greatest geniuses are hidden behind the most ordinary appearances. Take care until our next story.